Welcome back to Outside Views. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for in-depth analysis on Brexit and UK politics. So let's get into today's topic. Brexit was supposed to give the UK greater control over its financial sector. Instead, it has left the UK and the EU locked in a struggle over the dominance of financial markets. And one of the biggest battlegrounds right now is derivatives clearing, specifically euro-denominated clearing. The EU has been pushing hard to move more of this activity from London to the continent. But as new rules approach, concerns remain about whether the EU's approach is actually working or whether it's just creating confusion and unnecessary burdens for financial firms. So let's break this whole thing down. At the heart of the issue is something called the Active Account Requirement, or AAR. This is the EU's flagship policy to shift euro interest rate swap clearing away from London's LCH, the London Clearing House, and into EU-based clearing houses like Eurex and Frankfurt. Under the proposed rules, any EU firm with more than 3 billion euros of gross notional value in euro interest rate derivatives must maintain an active clearing account at an EU clearing house. Sounds simple so far, doesn't it? Well, not quite. The problem is that financial industry executives are still unclear on exactly how much trading activity they need to move to comply with the new rules. And there's also a big issue with reporting requirements. EU firms will have to submit reports every 6 months detailing their euro interest rate derivatives exposure. This adds another layer of bureaucracy to a system that is already highly complex. Firms are worried that the operational burden of compliance will be too high. In a recent industry forum in Frankfurt, portfolio managers and derivatives experts raised alarms that this could end up being an expensive and inefficient process. One of the biggest concerns is that the AAR does not define precisely what qualifies as an active clearing account. And this lack of clarity has left firms guessing. Caroline Dawson, a legal expert from Clifford Chance, pointed out that the draft proposals are written in dense legal language that is difficult to interpret. Without clear guidelines, firms may struggle to know if they are actually complying with the rules. And then there's the issue of exemptions. The EU has proposed that any firm already clearing at least 85% of its euro interest rate derivatives at an EU clearing house will be exempt from the AAR. This might sound like a way to reduce the regulatory burden, but it creates new problems. For example, some firms may be tempted to shift all of their business to Eurex just to ensure compliance, but that raises concerns about best execution rules. Under EU law, financial firms are required to get the best possible price for their transactions. If they move all their clearing activity to Eurex just to comply with the AAR, they may be violating best execution rules by not considering better pricing options available elsewhere, including London at the moment. And this highlights a deeper issue at play. For years, the EU has struggled to reduce its reliance on London's financial infrastructure because they always shifted. And even after Brexit, London remained the dominant financial hub in Europe, particularly for derivatives trading. The EU has been determined to change this, arguing that having so much euro-denominated clearing outside the bloc creates systemic risks. Klaus Lober, chair of the CCP Supervisory Committee at ESMA, has said that EU financial institutions remain excessively dependent on offshore clearing houses, which poses a financial stability risk. But the reality is that shifting this business to the EU has been much harder than Brussels anticipated. So consider what has happened so far. Since Brexit, some financial activities have moved from London to the EU. For example, the clearing of credit default swaps has shifted to Paris after ICE closed its London-based CDS clearing houses in 2023. But the big prize, the clearing of euro interest rate swaps, has remained largely in London. And why? Because financial firms still find London more efficient and more liquid. and they are not forced to yet. The infrastructure, the pricing and the operational efficiencies remain better in London. Eurex, the biggest EU-based interest rate swap clearinghouse, has over 700 clearing members and clients, but only about a third of them currently have active clearing accounts. That means most EU financial institutions are still using LCH in London. Even with the AAR coming into force, there are doubts about whether this will change significantly, but there's one thing we talk about later. Matthias Graulich, an executive board member at Eurex, has said that he expects more firms to start using active accounts once the AAR is implemented. But will they really shift significant business? That remains an open question with one condition, because there's also the issue of political risk. The EU Commission still needs to endorse the final version of the AAR before it can come into force. And this means there is still room for changes or for delays. And meanwhile in London, UK regulators and financial institutions are indeed watching closely. Any move by the EU that forces European firms to move clearing activity out of London could trigger countermeasures from the UK government, but it's still a necessity in the long run. And if EU firms struggle with the transition, the EU itself could face pressure to soften the rules for a moment. And this brings us to the transitional period for euro clearing in the UK. After Brexit, the EU granted temporary equivalents to UK-based clearing houses, meaning that European firms could still use LCH in London without immediate restrictions. That equivalence period was originally set to expire, but has been extended multiple times due to concerns that cutting off access too quickly could disrupt financial stability. The EU knows that London still plays a crucial role in euro clearing, and despite political pressure to shift business to the EU, the financial reality has not changed because of that transitional period. As it stands, the transitional period is still in place, but it remains unclear when or if the EU will fully phase out equivalence. It's supposed to be this year. If the EU forces a hard brake, it risks creating a financial shock for European markets. And if it keeps extending the transitional period, it tacitly acknowledges that London is too important to replace anytime soon, and this is not an option, to be honest. But this puts Brussels in a difficult position. Politically, the EU wants and needs to control its own financial infrastructure. Economically, it knows that disrupting access to LCH could do a little bit of harm here. And the longer the transitional period continues, the clearer it becomes that London's dominance in clearing is not just about regulation, but about market efficiency. But it has to end. But what happens next? The final version of the AAR is expected to be published by the end of June, the supposed end of the transitional period. At that point, we will see if any adjustments have been made to address industry concerns. But even if the rules go ahead as planned, the bigger question remains unanswered. Will the EU actually succeed in shifting euro clearing away from London then? Or will financial firms find ways to keep as much business in the UK as possible? And what does this mean for Brexit Britain? On one hand, it shows that London remained indispensable to Europe's financial system for the time being. On the other hand, it highlights the ongoing friction in UK-EU financial relations. The fight over clearing is not just about derivatives. It is about control and security. It's about whether the UK can remain a global financial powerhouse despite Brexit. And clearing will leave London at some point. It's about whether the EU can build its financial infrastructure it needs to reduce reliance on London. But what do you think? Will the EU's new clearing rules work, or will London continue to dominate euro derivatives clearing despite Brexit? And what does this mean for the future of UK-EU financial relations? Let's discuss, and if you want to see another video right now, the next one is right here in the end screen.